Have you ever looked in the mirror and felt something was wrong? Not with your body, not with your clothes, but with yourself? FRANTZ Fanon knew exactly what I'm talking about when he wrote that the black man is not a man, not because he's less human, but because the world taught him not to recognize himself as such. Stop for a second. How many times have you wished you were born different? How many times have you looked at your skin, your hair, your features and thought, if I were lighter, it would be easier? If this question makes you uncomfortable, it's because we've touched something real. If it doesn't make sense to you, maybe it's time to understand why it makes so much sense to millions of other people. Racism isn't just that obvious aggression on the street or the nasty comment at work. There's a much more perverse, much more subtle type of racism, the one you carry inside yourself, like a silent virus, corroding your own image. Fanon called this alienation, but we can call it by its real name: internalized racism. Imagine, for a moment, that you grew up being taught that everything that comes from you is inferior. Your music is noise, your religion is primitive, your beauty doesn't exist. Your way of speaking is wrong, your history doesn't matter. Now imagine this wasn't said once, but thousands of times, in different ways, every day of your life. Through television, books, school, subtle comments, glances, silence. Do you think you know yourself, that your preferences, your tastes, your fears are genuinely yours? What if I told you that much of what you think about yourself was planted there by a system that profits from your insecurity? Fanon dedicated his life to unmasking this mental prison, and today we're going to do the same thing. Here's the truth nobody wants to tell you. You were trained to hate yourself, not explicitly, but systematically. You were taught to see through the eyes of those who oppress you, to desire what denies you, to reject what defines you. And the cruelest part of all, you believe these choices are yours? Fanon understood this because he lived it. Psychiatrist, writer, revolutionary, he saw from the inside how the colonized mind works. He knew that before fighting racism out there, you need to recognize the racism that lives in here. Stay until the end of this video because we're going to deconstruct every layer of this psychological trap. If you're here, it's because something inside you suspects that not everything is what it seems. And you're right. Hit like if you're ready for this uncomfortable but necessary journey. Let's discover together how to recognize and break the invisible chains that bind us. You think you're free because you can choose which hair product to buy, which music to listen to, which neighborhood to live in. The system sold you this beautiful lie that your choices are yours. But Fanon saw through this illusion when he worked as a psychiatrist in Algeria. He watched his patients, brilliant minds trapped in bodies they'd been taught to hate, making choices that weren't really choices at all. Let me tell you what society taught you as truth. Success looks white. Beauty looks white. Intelligence sounds white. Professionalism dresses white. Normal behaves white. You absorbed these messages before you could even spell your own name. They came through Disney movies, where the villain was always darker, through history books where your ancestors were footnotes, through magazines where your features were flaws to be fixed. The myth goes deeper than you think. You were told that if you just worked hard enough, spoke well enough, dressed right enough, you could transcend race. You could become one of the good ones. The system offered you a deal. Reject everything that makes you different and maybe, just maybe, we'll accept you. But here's what they didn't tell you. Acceptance was never on the table. The game was rigged from the start. Think about it. How many times have you heard someone say, "I don't see color," as if that's supposed to be a compliment? How many times have you been told you're articulate, like it's surprising? How many times has someone touched your hair without permission, as if your body is public property? These aren't innocent interactions. They're reminders of your place in the hierarchy. The cultural myth teaches you that racism is about individual bad people doing obviously bad things. It's the guy in the hood, the boss who says slurs, the cop who gets caught on camera, but that's just the theater. The real show is happening in your mind, where you've internalized every message about your supposed inferiority. You've been taught to police yourself, to code switch, to shrink, to apologize for taking up space, to be grateful for opportunities that should be rights, to see other people who look like you as competition instead of allies, to distance yourself from anything too ethnic or urban or ghetto, words that are just polite ways of saying too black, too brown, too you. Fanon called this wearing a white mask. You perform whiteness so well that you forget you're performing. You become fluent in a language of self-denial. You learn to see yourself through the oppressor's eyes and somehow convince yourself that this borrowed vision is your own sight. The most insidious part? The system rewards you for this. Performance. You get the job, the approval, the access, as long as you keep the mask on. As long as you keep agreeing that everything about your authentic self needs fixing, hiding, or apologizing for. But what happens to the person underneath the mask? You're living in a cage, but the bars are made of thoughts. Fanon understood this. When he wrote Black Skin, White Masks, he saw how colonization doesn't just conquer land, it conquers minds. You've been so well trained that you've become your own prison guard, watching yourself, judging yourself, limiting yourself before anyone else has to. Picture this. You're in a room full of mirrors, but none of them show your real reflection. Instead, they show you distorted versions. Too dark, too loud, too much, not enough. You spend your whole life trying to adjust yourself to match what you see, never realizing the mirrors are broken. That's the invisible prison you're fighting. An image that was designed to defeat you. Every morning, you wake up and put on armor. Not the kind that protects you from the world, but the kind that protects the world from you. You modulate your voice so you don't sound aggressive. You control your expressions so you don't seem angry. You choose your words carefully so you don't appear threatening. You've become a master performer in a play where the script was written by people who never intended for you to be the hero. The prison has no walls because it doesn't need them. The walls are in your head. They're made of every time you've been told to calm down when you were already calm. Every time you've been followed in a store. Every time you've been the only one in the room and felt like you had to represent your entire race. Every time you've been asked, where are you really from, as if your existence here needs justification. Here's how deep the programming goes. You probably don't even trust your own anger anymore. When something racist happens, your first instinct isn't to trust your gut, it's to question yourself. Was that really racist? Am I being too sensitive? Maybe I'm imagining things. You've been gaslit so thoroughly that you doubt your own experiences of oppression. Fanon saw this clearly in his patients. They would come to him with depression, anxiety, self-hatred, but the real diagnosis was much deeper. They were suffering from what he called sociogenic trauma. Trauma caused not by individual events, but by the very structure of society itself. They weren't sick. The world that made them feel sick was sick. The invisible prison operates through isolation. It convinces you that you're the only one struggling with these feelings, that everyone else has figured out how to be comfortable in their skin, that your discomfort is personal weakness rather than systemic oppression. It makes you compete with others who share your experience instead of connecting with them. You live in constant hypervigilance, calculating every move. Will this outfit make them uncomfortable? Will this hairstyle cost me the job? Will speaking up make me the difficult one? You've internalized their fear of you and made it your fear of yourself. You become afraid of your own power, your own voice, your own presence. The cruelest part, you call this survival strategy, professionalism, or fitting in, or being mature. You've given your oppression a respectable name. FRANTZ Fanon didn't just theorize about this prison, he lived in it, then spent his life finding the keys. Born in Martinique, educated in France, he was the perfect example of what the colonial system wanted. An assimilated black man who could prove the system worked, but something broke inside him when he realized that no matter how French he became, he would never be French enough. In Black Skin, White Masks, Fanon dissected his own psychological autopsy. He wrote about the moment he saw himself through white eyes for the first time, not as a person, but as a problem. "Look, a Negro," a child said, pointing at him on a train. In that moment, he became aware of his body not as his own, but as something that existed for others to judge, fear, or fetishize. This is what Fanon called racial epidermal schema, the moment when your skin becomes a prison uniform you can never take off. Your body stops being yours and becomes a political statement, a threat, a curiosity, anything but simply human. You learn to see yourself as a racial being first and an individual second, if at all. But here's where Fanon's genius shines. He realized that the problem wasn't being black. The problem was living in a world that made being black a problem. The pathology wasn't in the colonized mind, but in the colonizing system. You're not broken. The world that broke you is broken. Fanon introduced the concept of lactification, the unconscious desire to become white, to escape the burden of blackness. It shows up in the strangest ways, the preference for lighter-skinned partners, the way you might speak differently around white people, the relief you feel when you're the only one in a room and can represent your race well. These aren't personal failings. They're survival responses to an impossible situation. In his later work, The Wretched of the Earth, Fanon went even deeper. He showed how colonization creates what he called compartmentalized worlds, separate realities where different rules apply to different people. You live in a world where the same behavior that makes a white person passionate makes you aggressive, where the same confidence that makes them leadership material makes you uppity. The most revolutionary thing Fanon discovered was this: the colonized mind doesn't just accept inferiority, it actively participates in its own oppression. You become complicit in your own diminishment. You learn to see other people who look like you through the oppressor's eyes. You distance yourself from them to prove you're different. You become the overseer of your own plantation. But Fanon didn't stop at diagnosis. He prescribed the cure. He understood that recognition was the first step toward liberation. You have to see the cage before you can break out of it. You have to understand how deeply the programming goes before you can begin to reprogram yourself. The moment you realize that your self-hatred isn't natural, isn't earned, isn't deserved, that's when the revolution begins. Not in the streets, but in your mind. Not with weapons, but with awareness. Right now, there's a war happening inside your head. On one side, there's the person you were trained to be, the one who apologizes for existing, who shrinks to make others comfortable, who has internalized every toxic message about your worth. On the other side, there's the person you actually are, powerful, valuable, deserving of respect without having to earn it through performance. This is your moment of crisis, and it's supposed to hurt. Fanon called this the lived experience of blackness, that jarring moment when you wake up and realize you've been living someone else's nightmare about who you're supposed to be. You're not losing your mind, you're finding it. Think about how exhausting it's been, carrying around all these borrowed thoughts about yourself. How much energy you've spent monitoring your own behavior, policing your own existence, apologizing for your own presence. You've been living as a guest in your own life, grateful for whatever scraps of acceptance were thrown your way. But here's what's happening right now. As you listen to this, you're starting to see the strings. The puppet show is being exposed. You're realizing that voice in your head that tells you you're not good enough, not smart enough, not worthy enough. That's not your voice. That's the internalized oppressor speaking. That's the colonizer. who set up shop in your consciousness. Fanon experienced this awakening when he was serving in World War II, fighting for France's freedom while being denied his own. He realized he was risking his life for a country that would never truly accept him as a citizen. The cognitive dissonance was unbearable. He had to choose, continue the performance, or face the truth. You're at that same crossroads now. You can. Keep playing the role you were assigned, the grateful minority, the exceptional one, the safe black person who never makes white people uncomfortable. Or you can start the difficult work of becoming who you actually are underneath all that. Programming. This is where it gets dangerous, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you recognize how deeply you've internalized racism, you start seeing it everywhere. In the way you automatically assume other black people are less qualified. In the way you feel more comfortable around white people than your own community. In the way you've learned to see your own features as flaws that need correcting. The person you were trained to be is fighting for survival right now. That voice is saying, don't rock the boat. Don't make this about race. You've worked so hard to fit in, don't throw it all away. But that's not you talking. That's your oppression talking, trying to maintain its hold on your mind. Fanon knew this moment would come. He knew that consciousness is painful. He knew that waking up means confronting how long you've been asleep. But he also knew this. You cannot heal what you cannot see. You cannot change what you will not acknowledge. The real you, the one who exists without apology, without performance, without the constant need to prove your humanity, that person is still in there, buried, under years of conditioning, but still alive, still fighting, still waiting to be free.